Hello, I'm Heather Rosso, a master's student at George Mason University, and I'm here to review and analyze the readings from George Mason University's Jimmy and Rosalynn Carter School for Peace and Conflict Resolution Facilitation course. I will discuss the theories from each week and provide a conceptual map for how these readings provide a comprehensive approach to facilitation, and how I incorporate these concepts in my own research and work on U.S. mass violence. Nicholas Bukola, David Livingstone Smith, Jay Rothman, and Mikhail Alberstein explore what it means to be human. Our identities are integral to our conflicts. From Bukola's examination of Frederick Douglass's argument for human dignity to decry racism and sexism, to the inner struggle for reconciling hatred and the desire for harm through the psychological act of dehumanization described by Smith, humans act in inhumane ways through the process of arguing against the humanness of others. By denying others the right to dignity, they are also being denied their basic humanness. Once stripped of being human, or being made out to be a hybrid monster human or subhuman, conflict is justified as a natural response to an unnatural being. Rothman and Alberstein extend the discussion of self and other identity by showing how we navigate in and out of variations of our identities through our interactions with others. There is a flux of identity as humans navigate individuality and group identities. These concepts come together through an examination of Hutus and Tutsis in Rwanda. Here, neighbors and friends would become enemies through a process of dehumanization that was predicated on circumstances and group dynamics. Without the group dynamics, the stripping of dignity and humanness is not likely to have occurred. This concept of individual versus group identities relates to the themes of Week 2's readings, where Rachel M. Goldberg discusses worldviews and frames. Wendell Jones and Scott H. Hughes address the complex adaptive systems of human social structures, and Torrin Hansen focuses on the social dynamics of power relations and resistance to the status quo. The more Marxist-influenced focus on critical consciousness as a way to engage in and alter society is a worldview that I personally find many flaws with, but it is an example of how a person's worldview can affect the way they understand conflict. Worldviews and cognitive and psychological frames are an important part of understanding conflict. Often, these worldviews go unquestioned and come into conflict with alternate worldviews. Although, as Jones and Hughes discuss, we have an adaptive ability to adjust situationally, the frames we bring to situations means we often adapt in ways that are different than others, which can lead to miscommunication, misunderstanding, and conflict. As Goldberg writes, we cannot understand others without also understanding their worldviews. Many practitioners and theorists have turned to reflection, active reflection, and reflexivity as a means of understanding worldviews and the ways they affect social dynamics and conflict. Linda Finlay draws from the work of John Dewey in theories of how humans learn. A distinction is drawn, I argue somewhat erroneously, between the professional artistry of reflective practice and the technical rationality. The rational self can work with the reflective self, and part of the problem with reflective practice theories is a shortcoming of understanding reflexivity. As a practicing Buddhist, I come across this misunderstanding often. Soren Eilertson and Kellen London explore reflexivity as a process of learning to examine the process of learning, or meta-learning, which comes a little closer to an Eastern understanding of reflexivity. Their single loop, double loop, and triple loop metaphor, or of reflective practice, is designed to provide a visual understanding of the coming back of thought and reflection. Eilertson, London, and Finlay all are addressing self-examination that needs to occur to understand in a deeper sense the roles of our theories of change on how we act as practitioners. Church and Rogers address how our theories of how and why change occurs are not only affected by our worldviews and understanding of conflict, but also affect how we address and work with conflict. Our understanding of individuals, groups, social dynamics, and means of change come together further in the discussions of Richard McGeegan, Sylvia McMecken, Wallace Warfield, and Susan Allen Nan. McGeegan and McMecken come at frames from another direction, discussing the destabilizing act of losing control. This ties the situational lens of Jones and Hughes with the effects of a lack of reflexivity can have on one's frame of reference. Emotions can significantly alter a frame of reference, affecting the lens with which a situation is seen. As McGeegan and McMecken describe, a lack of control can trigger an emotional response that creates anxiousness, causing victims to act out to remedy their lack of control. In this lens, the one feeling out of control can dehumanize the other that is seeming to stand in the way of control. Nan discusses how consciousness plays a role in whether one is able to receive the other as human, reversing the dehumanizing stance. Warfield, although his model is directed toward facilitators, also could be useful for those at the heart of the conflict, if a facilitator can help them to pause, reflect, share, and gather their thoughts, inputs, and situational analysis and re-see the scenario. As seen in the works of McGeegan, McMecken, and Nan, emotions play an important role in understanding conflict. Understandably, this can lead to confusion in how to address conflict and how to address the emotional aspect of conflict specifically. Peter Coleman attempts to address emotions through his readiness theory in contrast to ripeness theory. Both theories are looking for points where emotions are either heightened or lessened to bring parties to a point where reconciliation can happen. The problem is that both theories still address conflict from a perspective or a lens of economics, which often doesn't apply to the deeper roots of conflicts, such as intractable conflicts that involve culture, religion, worldviews, and histories of unaddressed wrongs and emotional pain. The pain and reward system posed by both readiness theory and ripeness theory do not address the more intractable conflicts. Matthew Adams also tries to find a more middle ground by looking for a hybrid of Bourdieu's habitus and reflexivity. However, the hybrid still relies on an economic model which falls short of addressing more intractable conflict. Michelle Mies looks to ritual, joking, and the arts as ways to address the emotions inherent in much conflict. These can be useful techniques, but also carry some precautions. Done without cultural sensitivity and knowledge, they can create more tension, especially between the participants and outside facilitators. While artistic expression, rituals, and joking may provide outlets for emotions, they do not inherently offer ways to work with these emotions, so additional work and understanding is needed to make use of these techniques. Being that conflict can be so multifaceted as to involve multiple conflicting worldviews, deep-seated emotions, shifting individual and group identities, and unexamined assumptions, they can quickly become quite complicated to address. John Paul Lederach's work on conflict transformation through his peace-building integrated framework works to break down the conflict into more manageable pieces that can work their way up to the levels of complexity and goals toward resolution, from the individual to the structural and cultural levels. In my research into U.S. mass violence, each of these concepts plays a key role. Individuals navigating social structures come into conflict with other individuals within the social structures. Perceptions or lenses of denied rights and needs, the feeling dehumanized and stripped of agency and dignity, lead to perceptions of the others as subhuman, which leads to a disconnect with the larger society. Their worldviews get skewed by this perception, and deep-seated emotions come into play with resentment and a complex psychological affliction. Specifically, in these seemingly intractable conflicts, it is necessary to take into consideration the human emotional interactions in a complex social structure with competing worldviews and yet unexamined frames of perception. Such complexity requires a breakdown of subparts to address the deeper structures and make facilitation more manageable. Many of my thoughts on facilitation prior to this course were reified in many of the readings. I have seen in my research a great deal of dehumanization, demonizing, and conflicts of worldviews. It happens on many fronts, from the acts of bullying and ostracizing of people who act differently than the social norm or majority, to the acts of violence and vengeance taken out by those who were belittled and cast out. For centuries, mankind has had difficulty dealing with difference, and cultural clashes have contributed to many conflicts. The most influential reading during this semester was the article by Smith on dehumanization. It provides ways to understand the psychology, sociology, and emotions behind some of the inhuman ways people treat each other. Equally important were the reading from McGuigan and McMecken on the destabilizing act of losing control, and the article by Nan on finding ways for re-seeing the inhuman evil as again a fellow human. It is when we see the humanity in the other that we are able to relate to and sympathize with the other, and less likely we are to wish harm on them. From a facilitation aspect, it is necessary to see both the parts and the whole in this complex problem, and to know how to both break down the whole into more manageable parts and be able to work through the parts to reach solution for the whole. These are central to my work with U.S. mass violence.